any interest in the brain, none whatsoever. I thought I was going to just be a psychologist and do therapy for a 45-minute to 50-minute session. Lo and behold, that didn't pan out, because after about 6 months working at Children's Seizure House, I realized that I felt a little bit like a hypocrite, because I really didn't know anything about medicine, and I certainly didn't know anything about the brain. So I felt it was time my journey to learn more so that I could have a better understanding of what the children were going through at Children's Seizure House. And I decided to put myself back in school. So just briefly, I'll tell you what my educational background is, so you have a sense of what my journey has been. In 1975, I got my first master's in counseling psychology with the emphasis on community and community organization. In 1979, I felt I needed to go back because I wanted to run some agencies and do a better job than some people I'd been working with. So I went and I got another master's in administration with a specialty in organizational development, so I could understand and learn what it meant to really run a team. Most of my work, just as a caveat, as I do the work that I do with people, most of my work, I believe, never is at all successful unless there is a team approach. And I mean that from the depth of my intellectual self and from my spiritual self. Without a team, there really is not too much success. After that degree in 1979, I decided it was time to go back and really journey more into the brain. So I went back and I decided to get my doctorate, and I did that at Temple University. I studied clinical and counseling psychology. I worked in psychiatric facilities. I did more doctoral internships in different psychiatric facilities, community and inpatient. But I wasn't happy really, because I wanted to still learn more about the brain. So what I did was I set up separate internships with Jefferson University and Temple University, separate from the program I'd been in. And I made some deals with the folks in both of those universities and said, you train me on the brain and I'll do neuropsychology for you for a year. And that's what I did. And I learned in dementia clinics and I learned in early childhood clinics. After that, I completed my doctorate in 1996. It was a 10-year process. My doctoral dissertation was on the differentiation of the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere of the brain, looking at cerebral vascular accident patients. Just to make that easy, that means stroke patients. It was a 10-year study because it took a long time to get clear left and right hemisphere patients to put them in as my sample. Through my years, I've had the opportunity and the blessing to work with patients from the ages of infancy through the elder years, and I have been blessed to do direct service, to do management, to do consulting, and to do lecturing. And still today, I still feel like I know very, very little, and I continue to go on and journey and learn more. The last 3 days I spent in seminar where I was learning more about cognition, which I'm going to share some of the things I learned there. And I also spent 2 days, this past Thursday and Friday, where I was studying under Dr. Robert Gordon, who is a godsend and just a brilliant, brilliant speaker on what has now come on to the political market as our new DSM-5. And if you know anything about the history of the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, you will know that it started out in the 1950s, and it has had many, many elaborate changes in ideological belief changes and philosophical changes and political changes through the last 50 or so years. So now we're at the DSM-5, and I want to start there for a minute. I want to pause and just have you do just a small reflection. When the DSM started back in the 1950s with the DSM-1, we had a little tiny manual that wasn't more than, I would say, maybe 50 pages. Our DSM-5 today is about, and I just received it yesterday because it just came on the market, is a total of, let me just tell you the exact number, 947 pages. I'm not sure if we got smarter or we just like to talk more. But what we have found out in the last 50-some years is that we know that we can categorize symptoms, put them in lists, try to describe what patients are going through so that we have a language to discuss with each other and with others what is going on in the field of mental health. What we also know from DSM-1 to DSM-5 is that the grand change has been that we recognize that although Freud, Sigmund Freud that is, starting out as a neurologist, knew that emotional and behavioral manifestations were actually part of brain issues. We've now come all these years since Sigmund to recognize in the DSM-5 that we have to look at the brain to really start to understand what we're going through in terms of the field of mental health. That is a very, very, very exciting acknowledgement. And I don't know if you've been reading the press or hearing about it, but the National Institute of Health and the National Institute of Mental Health is actually, there is a small body, a small branch that are thinking that they may not even want to accept the DSM-5. Now, if you ponder that for a minute, you want to ask yourself a question, why? What is happening in our field of mental health, of psychiatry, psychology, and social work, is we're starting to have this big debate, this is not a little debate, on should we be looking at mental health diagnoses strictly through a symptom, character, trait, etiology, or, to call it really science, should we be looking at mental health manifestations from a more medical point of view, like we would a hip or a brain aneurysm or cardio problems or diabetes. So it's going to be very exciting to think about what's going to be happening in the next 5, 10, 15 years as we debate this further and see where the next DSM is going to go. I also want you to know, just so that you can put this in some kind of a boundary, that our diagnostic statistical manual, the thing that we use that some people would call the Bible of mental health, we actually are going to be in the year of October 2014. We are going to be held by insurance companies responsible not to use the DSM-5 to do diagnostic coding for insurance, but to use the new, there's going to be a new international coding of diseases that's going to come out. It's going to be the 10 that's going to be coming out, and that is what we're going to have to use for insurance. So as you see, there is this push to move us to really understand more of medicine. It makes me giggle because we go back to Sigmund. But if we're going to be moving back or moving forward, because we have such amazing technology, brain technology, MRIs, PETs, CAT scans with dye, we have so much going on that we can actually see our behavior, our thoughts, and our emotions in scans. So with that in mind, and I wish I could see all of you because this is the first time I've ever done this, so I don't know what you're thinking about what I'm saying. But with that in mind, I hope that gives you a sense that the brain is really at the center of mental health. It's not the only thing that's at the center. There are many other important variables, but the brain now is really at the center. And I just want to give you one other tidbit of information, which is very exciting because this all starts to go together when you think about behavior, emotions, thoughts, and the brain. The University of Pittsburgh, just this year, in collaboration with a multitude of brilliant minds, has designed a new machine beyond the CAT scans, beyond the PET scans, a new machine which now allows us to do something which we have never been able to do before, which is very exciting. And that is, before our CAT scans and our MRIs and our PET scans, we were able to see structure of the brain through our original scans, and then we were able to see through our MRIs and our PET scans, we were able to see function of the brain, what the chemicals of the brain were doing as we were thinking or looking or hearing something. But this new fiber track system that's coming out and led, spearheaded by the University of Pittsburgh and their brilliant minds, from mathematicians to statisticians to psychologists to medical, so many people involved. We are now able to see what we could not see before, and that is axonal diffuse damage. And I'll be explaining a little bit about that. And why is that exciting for us in the United States? Well, it is extremely exciting for our military. The United States military, our Marines, and all of our soldiers, when they come home and they have post-traumatic stress disorder, we now, and this is now a multi-billion-dollar project with our United States military and the University of Pittsburgh and the other people involved, we are now able to start having small sample populations from our guys who have fought for us in our country to those guys who have been suffering with post-traumatic stress for so long and no one could really say it was something definitive. Now we recognize that there is a machine that actually tracks the fibers in the brain that can see axonal diffuse damage. It's very powerful. It's very powerful for the soldiers. It's very powerful for the soldiers' families. And it's an amazing thing for us as a country economically to understand what we need to be paying for, what we should be paying for. So a lot of this work that is going on is high caliber and just very, very exciting. And it's changing constantly. All of the work about the brain, billions, and I would say trillions of dollars are being spent on trying to understand the brain. Okay, so with that in mind, I want to say that from that end of things, which is where it's high-level technology, I want to bring it back down to us here, we in the communities, the parents, the mothers, the fathers, the teachers, the educators, the social workers. I would like to start with an introduction to the brain to get you to have a sense of navigating what are the parts of the brain, what do they do. And I want to say that, it's not like back in the day where we said, oh, X part does just one thing. The brain is something much more magnificent, something much more intricate. And what we recognize is that the brain works in totality. Yes, there are sections of the brain that do have their homework and do it well if we have a brain that is not damaged or had any hits. However, the brain is also very resilient and extraordinarily flexible. And because of that, there is even more new exciting information about recognizing that just because you have a hit somewhere doesn't mean that other parts of the brain can't pick it up. So let me go back to the DSM-5 just for a minute. Because as we start to journey, and you're probably thinking about your children, and you're probably thinking about your cases and your patients, you're probably saying, why did you mention the DSM-5? Why did it even come up at all? And how many times have you gone to so many psychiatrists and social workers and psychologists and preachers and counselors and everyone and educators, and everybody else has a diagnosis for your child? And everybody thinks they're right. And that's because everybody's heart is in their heart, and it's in the place of their training. It's like the metaphor about the elephant and the blind man. If you think about how a blind man, if you put 10 blind men around an elephant, they will be describing it in many, many different ways. Then why is that? It's because they have had the opportunity to touch the trunk, to touch the tail, to touch the belly, to touch the legs. And from that point of view, without moving all around the elephant, that is what they think an elephant is. So although your experiences with mental health workers and with educators may have been sometimes wonderful and maybe sometimes not so wonderful, if you think about the elephant and you think about the training of these professionals, maybe it can help you have a sense of empathy or simpatico for their experience, because they also have a mind and a brain. So now before we go into the specifics of what that brain is made of, that wonderful orchestra of amazing gifts that we all own, I want to ask you some questions. And you might need to take out some pencil and paper. I don't know if you have any in front of you, so take a minute. But I want to ask you some extremely serious questions. So I would be pausing if I could see your faces, and I hope I'm not going too quickly. So let me just say, if the rhythm of this is too quick or too slow, just give me a little hint so I know. So I'm going to start, and I'm going to ask you these questions. There's just a couple of them. The first question really has to do with your experiences. And here it goes. Did you ever know, and put the word know, K-N-O-W, did you ever know something? Like really have a true intuitive sense, a true knowledge about something, but you would never dare to say anything because you thought you might be wrong, or that you were not nice, or that you were not politically correct? Take a minute, if you will, or two, and think about this question. Really let your mind ponder on it. And jot down some of the experiences you may have had where you felt you really knew something. However, you felt you couldn't say anything. So just take a minute. Okay, I hope that gave you enough time. Now I want to ask you something. Do you know the reasons why you didn't say what you knew? And did it ever come to be that moons later, a year later, 6 months later, 5 years later, somebody else says what you knew and you went, oh my goodness, I already knew that. If you have had that type of experience, you have had the privilege of understanding and experiencing the experience of your brain and your mind in concert. The mind is the structures. That's the hard wiring. Your arteries, the blood, the veins, the ventricles, all of those things. Those are the parts that are just put in when you were made. And sometimes we're all not made the same. As a matter of fact, we know that there are some people who function absolutely magnificently with only one hemisphere. Many, many studies on that. But with whatever you have as your brain when you started, that is your mind. Now the mind is highly impacted by the brain. Your experiences, what you've done, what you've been taught, what you've been reinforced to do, your culture, all of those things have made you have the brain and your mind. So you have the hardwired material, but it doesn't mean you're just hardwired. Because all the rest of what happens to you from inception on makes you who you are. So, I have another question for you. The second question is this. Do you think you are smart? Or do you think you're kind of okay intellectually? Or do you think that you're not so smart, maybe even would privately, quietly, silently, maybe not even tell yourself, but you really think you're stupid? Again, when you think about that question, think about what brings you to your answer. How did you come to know that you're smart? How did you come to think you're just average, okay intellectually? How did you come to think, unfortunately, that you might not be so smart? Next, if you really reflect on it, think, who was there to judge you? Who was there to tell you? How did you learn it? And if you think you're very bright or you think you're not so bright at all, is any of that reality? That's that interrelationship between the mind and the brain. It's a magnificent, magnificent relationship. So let's get started. And if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. And I certainly don't have any problems stopping and answering anything that you might have. So even though I call this an introduction to the brain, in the years that I've been doing my work, I really feel professionally that understanding the brain is the art of common sense. Many of you are probably fantastic parents, fantastic educators, great clinicians. And you already have known, even before you went into training as an educator or a clinician, or the not so much training we've had as a parent, you've already known what makes sense in terms of raising children. So as we go through this today, I would like you to think about yourself. And you know yourself, even if you have blinders, or you might know yourself really well. But I want you to think of this as building self-esteem as a parent and advocate for your children. Because really, building self-esteem and being an advocate doesn't mean you have to know the brain. It means you just have to have the courage and the resilience to acknowledge what you already know and to use your common sense, because technically that's much more brilliant than all of the research. So how knowledge of the brain influences adult-child understanding? My specialty is neuropsychology and clinical psychology. For those of you who don't know neuropsychology and what it means, it's a hybrid term. It's a marriage between the field of neurology and psychology. I am neither a physician nor am I a psychiatrist. I do not do medications, but I've been in the field since the 70s, and I do have a good sense of what brain-behavior relationships are, and I do have a good sense of my experience and study of knowing a little something about using medications to help our children. And as a clinician, I work with families all the time. So we're going to try to look today and get a sense of what is that relationship between the brain, emotions, thought, and behavior, and get to kind of go into the brain a little bit and look at its parts. I say that we are going to really understand the brain at a basic level, and I say it's really like a circle, and that's why I mentioned Sigmund Freud at the beginning, because as Sigmund Freud knew before he started his psychoanalysis that it all had to do with neurology. Okay? We also have a new direction, and the new direction is taking us into really mechanically, through all of our technology, really being able to see, to play out all the hypotheses, all the hunches that we've had about brain-behavior relationships. So I want to start with some of my biases, and they definitely are my biases, and you may or may not agree with them. So here goes. GIGO. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. I use it every day with every single patient or in any type of consulting situation I'm in. People say, what is it? I say GIGO means garbage in, garbage out. What I basically mean by that is consider your source. And then consider your own biases and consider your own filters. Okay? Because all of this makes a difference in terms of how you hear, feel, smell, and experience what's going on in your experience. I also say garbage in, garbage out. I use it in our medical world at the hospital here in Western Maryland Health System. When I say what you put in your body is what you get out in terms of its performance. So GIGO applies in many, many ways. Let's go down to perception. How many times do we say beauty is in the eye of the beholder? It's all within the context. So what you've been trained to know is beautiful is what you consider as beautiful. If you've been trained to know that something is ugly, you're going to think it's ugly. We now have new research, by the way, that has just come out, which is fascinating in terms of looking at some of our mental health diagnoses, particularly our borderline patients, where we recognize that we can actually see it on scans, that the borderline patient in our DSM-4, because borderline is going to be changing now in DSM-5 in many ways, but our borderline patient does not see neutral faces. You know, just a person you're looking at, they're not smiling, they're not grimacing, they're not doing things, just a neutral face. A borderline person will many, many times more than not interpret that neutral face in a nasty, negative, angry kind of way. And think about your borderlines who are so quick to react, so quick to be angry, so quick to be insulted. But now we can see that process in the brain. So it's not just the cultural, it's not just the experience. We now know that we have a mechanistic, mechanical part of what's going on in the brain that is reinforced by what happens in the person's experience. Another thing that's very important in terms of thinking about the brain is the whole concept of expectancy. You know from being, if you're in sales or if you've ever done sales or you've ever been sold the Brooklyn Bridge, you know that it is what you expect. And oftentimes you will convince yourself that what you got, even if it isn't what it truly is, what you thought you were getting, because of expectancy theory, you will convince yourself that it is the thing that you always wanted. That's why sales is very powerful. That's why there's so much psychology in the whole world of sales. And then we go down to our long-term issues in terms of nature versus nurture. And yes, we are still saying that yes, there is hardwiring, yes, there is genetics, yes, there is hereditary. What is changing, and which is so exciting for us, all of us, is that we know that the other side, nurturing, has a much more powerful place than it did 50 years ago. And that is very exciting. Not only is it humbling for all of us, but it's also, and could be and should be in my should world, it should be empowering to us that we now recognize that we have a lot to do with what we came into the world with and the patients we work with and our students and our children. Okay, so now let's get a little brain stuff here. Electrochemical process leads to psychopharmacology and economics. Remember I said that these were my biases. These are the things that I think about when I work with people or teams or with my patients. A lot of what we do in our field of mental health and education and behaviorism is we understand a little something about our neurotransmitters in our brain, and we know a little something about the electrical chemical process in our brain. And that has led us to say, oh my goodness, serendipitously or otherwise, that there's something called psychopharmacology. And it can diminish or delineate or stop or change or make neutral some of the behaviors, emotions, and thoughts that our patients have. We also know that the field of psychopharmacology is a multi-billion-dollar industry. We know that this industry has been politically correct and politically incorrect. We know that people in the Department of Mental Health and NIH have been on boards for pharmaceutical companies and taking goodies that may have led to their perceptions, and that some things aren't always what they seem. We need to be cautious. You need to be very clear. You need to be very aware. You need to know everything about the medications, reading all of its side effects, particularly if your children or your family are taking multiple psychiatric meds and other medical medications, which may have contraindicated problems and lead to more difficulties, from cognition to emotion to behavior to motor control. So yes, do I think it's necessary for us to have our psychopharmacology? Yes, I do. It definitely has its place. Everything used as the wise man would is a good thing. Anything overused is not so good, and we really need to have a voice about it. So let's take a look at neurotransmitters. They're so exciting for me, and I just have something very pragmatic to share with you about neurotransmitters. They influence us, and we influence them. And I want to tell you one of the ways that we influence our neurotransmitters, which is pretty neat because it's empowering, because it's something you could stop today. However, because I know it's not just the brain, and it's the mind, and it's the mind, and it's the brain, it might not be so easy, because all of us are made up of lots of habits. But I'm going to ask you to really reflect on this habit if you have it. Any of you drink diet sodas, stuff with phenylalanine in it? Ever look on the labels of the food and the stuff you drink? Well, if you happen to notice, there is now a warning sign. It's been there for over 10 years, I think, that says this product contains phenylalanine. And if you're feeding diet sodas to your kids because they're getting on the large side, and you think you're doing them a favor by giving them diet foods, oy, 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 rethink it. Go online and say, what does phenylalanine do to the brain? Phenylalanine messes, it's a precursor, and it messes with your neurotransmitters. It's kind of like putting, if you have a model of a lock and a key, and you put the key in the lock, well, when you drink your diet sodas, you're putting a fake key, into the lock. And you lock it up, you jam it, so that your natural biochemical processes can't match up, can't go there. If you've heard some people are getting very severe headaches or just feel a little on the strain or are fatigued or a little irritable, check out and see how much diet stuff they're doing. The research shows the diet stuff does not really help you lose weight. It's just a game. So that's just one thing that I think that you can empower yourself with. And we'll talk a little bit about the neurotransmitters. We won't go into them in detail, but I want to introduce you to them. And the other thing is basic health. Basic health is so important in terms of your brain. You know, you can't just say, my brain's not a part of me, and have diabetes and have obesity and don't exercise and all of those kinds of things. Because believe it or not, in the last 10 years, we know that diabetes and cardio issues all impact cognition, all impact what's going on in the brain. Think about it when the insulin levels are going up and down and what happens to cognition. Not only cognition, but how about to your affect, to your emotions? Basic health is a powerful player in having a healthy brain. Taking care of yourself, taking care of your children, not letting anybody to tell you to eat or drink things that you know are garbage is very important. If you go back to G.I. Joe, you will know that what you put in is what you get out. It's very significant. And I'm going to talk more. I'm going to actually ask you to take a little inventory to get a sense of that for yourself and your loved ones and the people you work with. And then, of course, we have to go back to the very, very beginning. You have to think about giving birth. Even when you first think about it, if you had an opportunity to think about it, I hope you did. Many, many people haven't. But if you did have an opportunity to think about giving birth, what do you think that environment should be like in the inside of you and on the outside of you? And what do you think in terms of the whole concept of, if you're going to give birth, being responsible? Now, I'm not going to get into what that word means because it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But just having those as things that you think about when you're with your children or your students, having them have a sense of what it means to give birth, what it means to give birth and be responsible. I worked with a group of teenage girls who had been in gangs, and we did a little informal survey, just a tiny little one. And we had about 12 girls in the group, and we did it multiple times with different girls. And we asked them, we said to them, what does it mean to be in relationship? And the girls said, what do you mean to be in relationship? You know, their attitudes. And they said, to be in relationship. We're like, we don't want to really be in relationship. And then they used some vulgar words explaining what they would do. They said, well, we go into relationship because it's like an activity. So we said, oh, an activity? And they said, yes, an activity. I said, well, what do you mean by an activity? Well, like you would go out to get something to eat. That's how you can have sex. Sex is an activity. And I said to the girls, I said, come on, you're pulling my leg. You just want to get a rise out of me. They said, no, Doc, really, honestly. It's an activity. We're not always going into these relationships because, like, we love each other. It's something to do. What a statement. So I'm going to leave that at that, and we'll move on to the next slide. So let's look at the structure and function of the brain. We're going to build self-confidence through knowledge. I'm going to name and locate some basic structures. I'm going to explain their functions. I'm going to share ideas that will improve interactions between you and your patients and your children and students. We're going to look at what I call the brain team. We have our central nervous system, which is your spinal cord and your brain. You have your peripheral nervous system, and you have your autonomic nervous system. All of these systems need to be working in tandem. They're very significant. The central nervous system sends messages back and forth to the peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system sends messages back and forth to the central nervous system through your spinal cord. Your autonomic nervous system is responding to everything. Do you know, not only do you have a nervous system of the brain, but we're now knowing that we have a nervous system of our belly. That a lot of us who might have irritable bowel syndrome or other problems, gastroenterology problems, it has its own nervous system. And it kind of makes decisions about what's happening in your life, in your belly. So all of this is a team working together. The brain. Okay, what is it? It's 3 pounds about, 2 millimeters thick, 1 trillion brain cells, at least. 100 different billion neurons. Hundreds of millions of neural circuits. And we're finding even more. Innumerable subcortical structures. That's below the cerebral cortex. Innumerable subcortical structures interacting in union, making us who we are. I like to say, because I'm very optimistic, that learning is limitless, and it is not defined by age. It is defined by health and experience. Looking at these pictures, if you got a little anxiety rush there, nothing to be worried about. All of you, if you have a computer, you can look any of this up. It's all there. There's thousands of studies on the brain. So we're just going to go in and we're going to take a little look. There's no test, so you don't have to worry about being questioned. This is just for you to get familiar. Think of the brain as an amazing orchestra with its violin section and its horn section and the string section. Think about it as this amazing concert, and then have some fun with it. Life. The serious part, though, is how we live our life makes an impact on our brain. The connections. Remember when I talked to you about that phenylalanine, that diet soda stuff that we've been We've been sold the Brooklyn Bridge. This is what I mean by a neuron. And I'll talk about this just a little bit here because I might do it again later. This is the bottom part of a brain cell. And remember I said that the brain cells, the neurons, they have both electrical and chemical processes. Well, those little things going in between each little brain cell, that little tail, that little bottom part of the brain cell, it's like, kind of like swimming in a stream. And those are the natural chemicals that go from one brain cell to another brain cell when the electrical chemical process is allowed to work naturally. See, what happens is, and it's a beautiful process, is that when there's enough stimulation happening to that particular section of the brain electrically, and that all has to do with chemicals, sodium, other chemicals, when that electrical system reaches a certain number, then it pops and it allows the chemicals to be released down the part of the brain cell, which is called the axon, to the axon hillock, and then out into this stream called the synapse, and then moves, makes relationship with. Remember, all of this is all relationship, even though there are trillions of billions of firing brain cells happening in your brain simultaneously every millisecond. Each one of those, of that teamwork, is significant. So when we have that phenylalanine, where that chemical is supposed to go, that neurotransmitter is supposed to go, that dopamine or that serotonin that you've heard about, where those chemicals, some of them are supposed to go, the phenylalanine locks it and says, nope, they're not coming in. So those chemicals hang out there in that stream. And what happens then? Well, think about it from a common sense point of view. If stuff is supposed to move from one place to another, but it can't get there, you got to back up. You got too much stuff hanging around. And that makes for differences in terms of how we think, how we feel. It has an impact. So the connection, it should be a perfect one. But with what we do to our bodies and how we live, by not having enough sleep, not good food, not good exercise, too much stress, we impact this system, this ultimate intricate system. And we can mess it up. That's a good thing and a bad thing to know. Because again, this is all about empowerment. So the reason I get so excited about the brain is because I want you to recognize you can change what you're doing. And that's pretty terrific. There are great possibilities in who you are, who you can become, what you can do with your brain, what you can do to help your students, your children, your spouses, your friends. Limitless possibilities if you change the way you think about your brain and you think about how you're living. Limitless. Now, I'm not trying to get, push my philosophy. I can back this all up with great research. And we're going to talk about some of that research a little later. So we can look at how the brain develops from the outside, from the moment of thinking about giving birth. We can look about the brain from the inside. As you have that child who's growing now, is infant, is out, what are we doing with it? What are we teaching it? All of these things impact brain development. We know, and this is old science, this was some Scientific American, my goodness, back in the 70s. We know that there are critical periods and sensitive periods in terms of brain development. We know, for example, that if you put patches over the eye of an infant and they don't have stimulation during the critical period in terms of when vision is necessary, that they won't have that vision. So yes, what we do once that child's out of our bellies does make a great difference. So I say inside because when you're now having that person in front of you, it's important to kind of metaphorically think about it. What's happening in that child's life? We know that stress levels on our kids from inception makes a difference on our memory system in the brain, on our hippocampus. Stress. Why? It's another chemical, cortisol. As that rises and the brain is constantly being hit by stress, what happens to that little tiny baby is really, really sad. Because what happens if that stress is intermittent, it's not like just a one-time shot, one-time thing, okay, the kid can regroup, get together. But if that stress is intermittent and uncertain, like a schedule of gambling where you don't know when you're going to hit it, the child stays on acute stress response. And so the chemicals in the brain are doing all kinds of things that impact a child. And what they know, sad as this is, they know that this stress, and this is not just from infancy, this is going, well, this particular study was on infancy, but we know that ongoing stress impacts. Remember when I talked about those brain cells firing, trillions of them firing, communicating with each other, the electrical system and the chemical system? We know what happens is, with too much stress, guess what happens to those connections? They're diminished. Just like in Alzheimer's disease, there's an atrophy. So inside is very important as well. Our job, it's not easy. It's incredibly not easy. It's not easy to explain all of this material to people so they can own it and feel good about it. It's not great when you have to sit in front of people who are not on the same planet as you are and understand things to the depth that you do, working with your children, your students, and your loved ones. It's a really difficult job to put all of this together, particularly, and this is with going back to my degree in administration and organizational development, particularly because I believe each one of us, as we speak, like I'm speaking to you now, I'm sending out words. I have no idea what messages you're picking up. One, I can't see your faces. Two, I can't hear you breathing. Three, I don't see whether you're looking at me, your eyes are down. I can't see it. So I'm assuming we're talking the same language. Are we? I don't know. But our job is to hopefully be able to get on the same planet as everybody else and have one language that we're speaking. And why our field is so hard is because, like I talked about at the beginning, we don't have one language. Like the blind man and the elephant, we don't have one language. We're all seeing the same situation from multiple points of view. And it's amazing, and it's a blessing that we get done what we get done. And then you add the brain into it and helping people try to understand that, yeah, the brain has something to do with this as well. It's a massive task, and I have great respect for everybody. So let's look at some of the things we have to counter. We have to know historically, you see like the little mug there with the little thing to push the medicine down, the chemicals down. We have to know that people are going to have many, many different theories about medications. And that can put you in a bad spot right away when you're talking about the brain. So as helpers for all of our children, and I'm just going to use children, I'll just use it, and I might say children's one moment, students or patients, whatever, but whomever we're working with, You have to realize that historically, everybody is on a different planet and has a different history about medication. For some people, medication has been the panacea. For others, it has been a nightmare. When you're working, the most important thing, remember I said it's important if you can just kind of have that empathy. You're probably going, empathy? What do you mean having empathy? These people have driven me crazy. Well, if you can have a little empathy and understanding that each person has the tools of their trade. And these people, I don't know what their true agenda is, I'm not in their mind, but at least on the outside of it, they are stating that they believe what they're believing. However, it doesn't mean that you don't have a right to have your belief about these things. So as you're talking about healing the child, changing a behavior, impacting the child's emotions, depression, anxiety, fear, shyness, all of these things, you have to put it all in perspective. The medications alone are never the answer. Even in non-mental health issues, we now know, in strict medical, forget mental health, we now know that to impact the brain, in medicine, we have to be able to look at the person holistically. And treatment has to be extremely holistic. So if you want to use your common sense, your brilliance, the knowledge that you know but you didn't want to speak up because of whatever the reason, it might have been courage or whatever, when you're working with others, say we need to address this student, this person holistically. Medications are one of the tools in our toolbox. It's not the only tool. Some medications are fabulous. Some medications are overused. When I came to consult for the Western Maryland Health System, I came from a different culture. I was a Jersey girl coming to the rural area of Western Maryland in the hills. I was a very different breed of person. I wasn't sure if I would be accepted. When I came in, all of our patients in our rehab unit, for the most part, were being given Xanax and Valium and Ativan and Ambien. Because, everybody was, nervous, they said, and anxious, they said. But they were all put on an antidepressant. And I said, why? Is it not true that people have just had a stroke, or have had encephalitis, or have just had heart surgery, or have just been through a traumatic brain injury? Is it not true that it is a normal response to be anxious, to be nervous, to be depressed? Why do you want to medicate that? If you can't give me a good reason how it's negatively impacting their rehabilitation, why are you feeding them stuff they don't need in their bodies? So for the last year and a half, no, they didn't throw me out. That's the good part of the story. For the last year and a half, what they have done is when we go into treatment team meeting now, they go, uh-oh, doc's going to want to know the medications. And if it looks like we have way too much medication and it doesn't make sense to me, we start to really review every medication. Nobody should be on 18 to 20 to 25 different medications. Now that's for the medical side, and that's what we're seeing. In our mental health side, we might see. I see them getting up to 5 and 7 and 8 medications. We really need to look at that. But again, look at the perspective of the person doing the prescribing. They come from a different planet. We have to help them get on our planet. Okay, so the brain cell production. Let's start at the beginning. In the developing human fetus, 250,000 brain cells per minute are starting to pop. It's amazing. It's like you can't even imagine. After birth, and you're going to hear me say this over and over and over again, life experience shapes the brain. That's just not my bias. That's hard science research now. Kath, when I first did this, for you a few years ago, I was a little bit on the nervous because I didn't have all the research behind me, but I knew it made sense to me. I knew from my own common sense point of view that I was right because I had seen it over and over and over and over again in my clinical practice. But now there is so much research popping out of the NIH, out of the NIMH, that's National Institute of Health and National Institute of Mental Health, and internationally, all over, Austria, Canada, Australia, you name it. Life experience shapes the brain. And let me just take a minute to share with you how I knew that. Back in the 70s, I was going to Temple University. Yeah, it does tell you how old I am. I was asked to be in a research study at Temple University and the University of Penn. They were doing a research study with Head Start folks in Philly, in Fishtown. And what we were doing is looking at the behavioral responses to these Head Start kids watching Mr. Rogers versus watching Sesame Street. And it was fascinating. Let me tell you that the two shows wrote on two different responses of behavior. You can try to figure out what you think might have happened, but it was very different. One of the sad things that we saw, and we see it now in our research in 2010, 2011, 2012, and 13, we see in our research overstimulation of the young child's brain is not so good. What we knew back in the 70s, doing that little piece of research for Head Start, we now have all the magnificent technology to see actually in the brain. It's too much. There has to be balance. So neural networks emerge with life experience, drawing new cell connections with increasing speed and diminishing connections. I don't like to use the metaphor of a muscle because it's not actually a muscle, our dear brain. But if you don't use it, we now know that the baby's going to lose it. The child's going to lose it. Another magnificent, and this is by Diamond at Berkeley, Magic Trees and Neural Forests, wonderful piece of research. But let me take it to the other end of the spectrum. We have our beautiful little infants that we know we have to balance in terms of stimulation. But now let me take us to the other end of our lives, because don't forget, all of us are going to get there, right? And we have to take care of ourselves as the caretakers and caregivers. So if you think about your own brain and what you need to do to protect it, we now recognize that we need similar things. We need balance of stimulation. We also now know through research, which is fabulous, that it's very important that the elderly brain in the 70s, 80s, 90s, that they actually can find new brain cell connections being made with appropriate activity and brain stimulation. I don't know if any of you know about the, you can buy it on the internet, Luminosity and the brain games and brain fitness. Now some of it is a lie and some of it's lousy. But when you go to the stuff that's really well researched, and there's a lot of it out there, doing novel things on a regular basis. A simple one, doesn't cost you a dime. If you write with your right hand, switch and try writing with your left hand for a day. What's that going to do? It's going to do great stuff for your brain. What it will do is it's going to make new brain cell connections. You know those trillions of interactions, electrical, chemical? It's going to stimulate all different parts of your brain. If you keep doing the same thing day after day in the same way, just like if you were going into the gym to build muscle, what happens? You don't get the great return. Same thing with your brain. So if you don't use it, and again, the brain is not a muscle, but it's just a metaphor. If you don't use it in novel ways to make new connections, then you're not really feeding the brain what it needs. And we know that from our early childhood studies all the way into our elderly and in gerontology. So remember, learning is the tool of the architect. You, each one of you, are the architect. As the parent, the teacher, the clinician, the social worker, the preacher, whatever. We're the architect. We're the ones that can help set a stage for ourselves, and we should be thinking about our own brain health and our basic health, and for those that we work with. The brain and its processes. We are looking at neuronal welfare. No, I'm going to tell you what that is. Brain stimulation, yes. Multisensory experiences, yes. Pattern detecting device systems, yes. Okay? I'm going to go through this slide, and then I'm going to ask Valerie and Kathy if anybody wants to take a break for a minute. Because I can't see you, I don't have a sense of where people are. Neuronal welfare, I meant to say warfare, but it could be welfare, is a process that happens, and it involves pruning. The brain, naturally, from infancy on, you're going to have these millions and trillions of brain cells. And they climb up and reach the different parts of the brain that they need to. If you can imagine like lattice that you put on the outside of your house. The brain cell sets up these tracking systems where all these billions of cells are going to go. They go vertically and horizontally. But after a while, you don't need all of them. And the ones that are not used as much, well, they're pruned away. Some are pruned away even regardless of what's happening with outside activity. That's just the natural scheme of things. Others are pruned away if they're not used. So it's not that there's a warfare or a welfare going on. The brain has its naturally, the schemata of producing tremendous amount of brain cells and then pruning. And this process happens again when the child is 10 and 13 years of age. And that's why there's all this new stuff about the teen brain and all that jazz. Brain stimulation, yes. As I said before, it's extremely important to be addressing how much you stimulate the brain, how you stimulate the brain. What we know from our studies in parent-child interactions, Ainsworth work, all the work in terms of parent-child relationship, we know that there are ways that increase the self-worth of the young one, and help stabilize the young one, keep the young one peaceful. And there are ways that stimulation do just the opposite. And those studies, the parent-child studies, the failure to thrive studies way back, they're all significant. They're things that we might want to talk about at another time. But this whole concept of brain stimulation, it's not just doing like we thought was Sesame Street. But it's what we're doing it, how we're doing it, the pace of how we're doing it. All of that is involved. And multisensory, yes. All of the work that we have in terms of, we are more than just one type of intelligence. We are multiple intelligences, multi-sensory brilliance. Some of us are more visual. Some of us are more auditory. Some of us are much more tactile. And you'll see this. And you'll see some of our kids and our students and our patients have deficiencies in these areas. And we need to know that not everybody, just like we talk about not everybody's on the same planet, not everybody is looking at a little red dot or a little blue dot or a little green square and seeing it, feeling it the same way we do. But multisensory experience is extremely significant to do all throughout life. Pattern detection systems. It's not just like our eyes look at a tree and we see a tree. It's very complex, extremely complex. We could talk a whole day on just what the eye does in terms of tracking and what the brain cells are doing in terms of movement and line, vertical line, horizontal line, broken schematics, all of these things. And then again, what do I have to add? The same theme. You will have a different visual perception if you've already had an experience of some sort with the visual image that you're seeing. So let's look at this. Human language, if you don't learn it by 10, they say it's hard to learn any language. Remember I talked about this critical sensitive periods. Vision. If there's no visual stimuli, brain cells for vision of the eye will not see. We have to activate our visual pathways during those critical sensitive periods. And it's interesting to note that there's no specific place where pictures are stored for later recall. Think about that. We don't have a place that puts the elephant, or at least the leg of the elephant. The brain deconstructs the incoming sensory information to color, to movement, shape, line orientation. All of the stimuli goes to different regions in the cerebral cortex, different parts of our occipital lobe, to the frontal lobe, and getting to the frontal lobe. And then we have to look at matching, and that's in terms of who we are and what we've been through. Matching occurs next. Successful finding of comparable elephants. Oh, when the little one first sees a four-legged thing, they call it a dog, and then a cat's got 4 legs, so it's a dog. Okay? Patterns and traits recognized from previous experience and stored along established neural pathways. Makes us comfortable. Oh, I can recognize this. Oh, this has meaning because I remember when I was with my mommy. So now you have made the match, and it is good. If there's no match and you're expecting somebody to have a match, they can feel really lousy. They can feel confused. There is confusion. I guess I must have been confused because I wrote it twice. Okay. The brain. So we had our basic team up there, right? Now we're going to go a little bit deeper into seeing the parts of the brain. We'll get a little bit more specific. And then we're going to talk even more about different parts of the brain. So you start to know that such and such does this thing and the cerebellum does something else. But then you're going to see that all of this really works together. So let's look at the peripheral nervous system.
Dr. Robbins?
Yes.
Anytime that you want to take a break, we can take a break for, 5-10 minutes. Just let me know.
Okay. I think that might be good. I'll get some more water.
Okay.
Okay. And is that good with everybody else?
Yeah, everybody's fine. We just wanted to give you a chance to have some water, go to the ladies if you need. I think we need to take like a 5-10 minute break because it's a lot of information. And I have to tell you that Kathy and I, are so excited. And if you could see our faces, it would be amazing because of several things. My mouth is hanging open.
Oh, I'm thrilled.
Amazing.
Good. Well, I hope that it's helpful, and I'm thrilled that you've asked me to do it. I thank you.
We're beside ourselves. Okay, great. We'll take a little break now and say it's now like 12:13. So say by 12:20 we'll come back.
Sounds good to me.
Okay, great.
All right. Bye-bye. Oh, Valerie?
Yes, I'm not going anywhere. I'm just here.
Do I just keep this on? It just stays on?
Don't do anything. Just walk away from your computer and get something to drink.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay. Hi, Michelle. Can you hear me? Hi.
Oh, you can hear me?
I can hear you, but I think everyone can hear us.
That's fine.
Okay, Michelle is having technical difficulties, so I'm going to try and help
And
her.
she has a question. I see she has a question. Okay, and I have a question. I can't figure it out. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead with her.
Okay. I'll hang up the phone.
Can you hear me, Val?
I can hear you. Let's see.
Maybe
Michelle?
Michelle is muted, maybe?
I just unmuted her. Michelle, can you hear us? I'm trying to answer her back. I'm working on this right here.
I just looked at Michelle, and Michelle is not muted.
I unmuted her.
Huh.
Okay, I just sent her a question back, a reply, so we'll see.
I'm working on the speaker, she said.
Ah.
I might have to go to the phone. Oh, okay. Where she would phone in.
Okay, I don't know how that works, but okay.
I don't either. But, so it's her speakers. And my question, you don't see my question in the chat?
No, because you may have sent it privately straight to...
No, I sent it to the entire audience.
I only have, okay, Michelle, okay, she's trying to do the phone. Send audio to enable muting, okay.
Oh yeah, you have to enable that.
I did.
Click on telephone.
Welcome to GoToWebinar, Web Events Made Easy.
Audio in her pane and click telephone.
Welcome to GoToWebinar, Web Events Made Easy.
Kathy, you there?
I'm here.
Oh, okay, you went away for a minute.
Yeah, I clicked on the telephone and then back to mic and speaker. She has to do that. So if she goes to telephone, when she clicks on telephone, then it gives her the call-in number and everything.
Okay.
And in the chat room, I sent it to the entire audience.
Okay, Michelle?
Hello?
Oh, you're there. Yay!
Hi. I'm here.
Okay. All right.
All right. I'm good to go. I couldn't figure out the microphone on my laptop. My husband's not around to do it for me.
Okay, so there we go.
All right. There
And
we go.
she's taking a break, so we'll ask her your question about the brain games online.
Yeah, 'cause I would really, I know that I've been seeing a lot of it, and I love the idea of writing with your left hand. I'm going to try that.
It's a good thing.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. But and
I
nobody,
think it's awesome.
can you hear me, Val? You guys can
Yes.
hear me?
Yes.
Michelle, you
Yeah.
can hear me?
Yes, I can.
Nobody sees my chat in the chat, huh?
No?
I saw the one that you sent.
You did?
I did in the line of similarities.
Yes.
Yes, I was able to get that.
I didn't get it.
Oh, okay. I wonder if Dr. Robbins can see it.
I don't know.
Let me see if I can copy it
Okay.
and put it in the question one.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's letting me copy it because it's white. Yeah, it's not. Okay.
Can you retype it?
Yeah, I guess I can. Missy? Yeah. Okay.
I can copy it. It's not letting you paste it.
It won't, no, I can copy it, but it won't paste.
Yeah, it won't paste.
Yeah, all
I
right.
did too.
Let me try it again. Similarities.
Oh wait, no, I got it. Wait a second.
Oh, but it says Michelle on mine.
Well,
Yeah.
because I just copied what she said.
Oh, okay. All right, great.
And that came up as a question?
Yes.
It came
Oh,
up
yeah.
as a question, but I copied what you said.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
You know what, Kathy? I might not be able to see your question because it has me and you both as an organizer on mine.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on with that. All right, well,
I don't know, but I got the question.
but then again, I put that in the chat room. So next time if I have a question, I will put it in the question.
Yeah, okay. It's my fault. Once again, demerit to me. I see it in chat, but I didn't see it in questions.
See that?
It's all me.
I know. See? And you're always blaming me. No,
I know.
I'm kidding.
It is
I'm
my
kidding.
way. I am just horrible.
I'm kidding.
It's that math that you're using.
Because I'm using the Mac. You know that, right?
Yep.
And so, Michelle, now you can put pressure on Valerie for when the next board meeting is going to be. We'd like to do it before school goes back. Okay?
Yeah.
Oh, and I thought you were going to say before school is out.
Now, before we start school again. Come on.
Okay.
Yeah.
All
What's the
right.
next board meeting, Val? Come on.
And I'm walking away. I'm heating up my coffee. How do you like that?
I have no idea, Michelle. Oh, my God.
Set a date, Val. Set it now.
Set a date. Now, Michelle, what days were we talking about and what times? And I'll pull my calendar up now.
Well, when do you usually do them?
Well, everybody's different now. Who can come when? So sometimes
I could tell you in starting in July, I have Fridays off.
okay.
So I'm free starting in July any Friday at any time.
All right. Well, I'll wait for Miss Coffee to come back. And then we'll do today.
Otherwise it would have to be evening for me because
Yeah. It's not my phone.
that's not mine. I'm on mine. Yeah, and June is just crazy. I just found out yesterday that I have diabetes, so I have a lot of
Type 2 or what? What
type 2.
Type 2.
Yeah, type 2. Yeah, I just found out.
Control.
So I have a lot of doctor's appointments and stuff to go to.
But very controllable.
It is, and I just scheduled a couple weeks ago, I'm having a gastric sleeve done, a bariatric surgery, to have this because I knew this was coming, and it will greatly help. So
It will. It
it's
will.
just, more stress. More stress,
Maybe
whatever.
we need to alleviate as we've gone through this training so far.
I love this training. This is awesome.
It's amazing. It's really amazing.
We're lucky to have Dr. Robbins, I gotta tell you.
She's amazing. She's a great presenter, and I'm really getting a lot out of this.
Yeah.
Me too.
I'm just glad that there's no picture of me.
You know.
Let's just be glad about that.
And you know what? Now that's our next step, right? Is to be able to do the webinar and, see her face. We didn't want to do that this first time around because we were totally confused. But the next time around, this is, when we can use the webcam and stuff.
That's when I'm going to have to put makeup on and everything? Great.
My hair, makeup on, you gotta be kidding me. I'll have to clean the room that's behind me. Amazing.
Yeah.
Michelle, you have no trouble hearing and everything while it's going on, even though I have
Oh,
this.
absolutely not. I'm fine.
Okay. So I will mute, when she begins again, I will mute us out because I think it goes smoother with her not hearing all of our background noise.
No, absolutely.
Kathy, you okay with that?
Yeah, and Val, what's the date for the next board meeting?
We were waiting for you to come back with your coffee. What days is everyone? Is it a day on a weekend, or is it an evening, or what is it? What was the general consensus?
I don't necessarily prefer a weekend, but if that's what everybody else can do, I'll do it.
Michelle has Fridays free starting July.
Starting July, yeah. I have Fridays off
All
in
day
July.
Friday?
Yeah. I get Fridays off in July for the summer.
What about that for you, Val?
It's fine for me, except for the first 2 Fridays. I won't be here.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, I got a Friday in there that I have to go away to North Carolina.
So the 20th and the 27th are fine for me. I mean, sorry, the 19th and the 26th. Okay, I can't see.
Okay.
The 26th.
Hi, I'm back.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt.
So
What day?
so the 26th would be better.
What
Okay.
time and where?
Well, we want to include Linda, so we could do it. We could have her come in. We'll find out if she could take off. If not, she could come in during her lunch.
Okay,
If
so
we-
was that Elizabeth?
Yeah, if we did it there.
Okay.
In Elizabeth?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to write tentatively lunch, Elizabeth, on the 26th of July.
Yes.
Okay.
And we will confirm via email.
Beautiful.
All right, you're in my calendar.
Mine too. I am all eyed in. All right. Dr.
is-
Robbins,
Yes, I'm here.
We have two questions.
Okay.
So I want to ask the first question, and then I'll give you the second one.
Okay.
The first question is, I would like to know if any of the brain games online would be helpful.
Oh, yes. My goodness. And if you want, I can send out to you. There was a conference I just went to, which was totally magnificent. And I have a list of the things, brain games that are highly researched so that you don't get duped. So, yes, they are very good to do. As a matter of fact, what the research is finding out is that, I get very excited about this, so you have to forgive me. But the research that's so wonderful is when you see people doing word puzzles and Sudoku and stuff like that, that's very good. But if you're always doing word puzzles, go back to what I was saying in terms of it not being novel. It's still the same conceptualization. So the more different types of brain games that you're doing, looking at different parts of brain processing, from visual to visual spatial to auditory, right, all of the different types of motoric, yes, they're excellent. They are totally excellent, not only for our patients, but for ourselves. Yeah, and I'll get you lists, and I will email them over to you.
Great, thank you. Our second question is, in the line of similarities in behaviors among children with similar disabilities, are there also similarities in their brains?
That's a great question. Whoever asked that question, bravo, bravo.
That was from me, your little peasant friend who follows you all over the country. Michelle, since you're on now, I can tell you, Dr. Robbins, you will never do your own introduction. We will do it for you, because one of the things that you did not speak about, which is tremendous, is the fact that as a doctor, you are also extremely family friendly. And one of the things that's very important to you is that parents understand intellectually. That is amazing.
Yeah. Right.
So Michelle, I just wanted, and Michelle also let you know we do our staff retreats at her mansion in West Virginia. So we'll give you that plug too. Okay. Okay.
I'm game anytime.
But
Okay, I would love it. It's a wonderful thing. Now, I do have 2 new additions to the household. I can't believe they're not barking. I got 2 Labrador retrievers, a little half brother and sister. So they'll be here.
Okay.
Okay, so let me get to your question. It's a wonderful one. I'm going to try to formulate it with some sequential intelligence here. Oh, God, I think of Edith Kaplan, Muriel Lizak, and Rorschach. Let me see if I can answer this question easily. You could, if you know anything about intelligence testing, there's this thing that we have to do with the patient, student, whatever. It's called block design. And the block design, multiple people can do the block design and get it right or get it wrong. And if they get it right or wrong, they could get it right or wrong for completely different reasons. So Kathy, your question asked, is it corollary, the same brain areas to get the same manifestation in the behavior? And the answer is no.
No.
Because, right, the answer is no. No. Now, obviously, you have to have some basic things in line in terms of the brain, that they have to be able to, reliability and validity point of view, be able to approach the task. So with that as a baseline, you know, that they have similar. Yes, they have to be able to move their hands, and they can't be obstructed in terms of motoric disability. And yes, they have to have good visualization, even with their eyeglasses, and they have to have some comprehension auditory of what you're requesting in the block design, right? So yes, those factors, yes, would be somewhat similar. But the actual how they arrived at their answer to the block design task,
right,
can be completely different places of the brain.
Okay. Now I have one small sub question. So, because some of what you were talking about takes the nature versus nurture argument and kind of throws it out the window because of what you said, life experiences, right?
Yes.
Okay. So if let's just say, and I don't know.
Yes and no, but go on.
I know. I'm going to use an example, but this is about more of a child that has a developmental disability.
Okay.
Let's say a Down syndrome child.
Okay.
Does their brain look similar to another child diagnosed with Down syndrome?
Oh boy, that's a great question.
And then here's the other piece. The reason why I'm asking all this is so, for example, like with my son, because he has ADHD, and I'm clear that that's a brain disorder. Does does that mean that his brain would resemble, in some areas, the brain of another child that has ADHD? Or no? Like if they were to do an MRI of the brain, are there similarities? Because, and last thing I'm going to say, the reason why I started thinking about this, because I remember years ago reading some research that was done which showed that people who have been sexually abused, their brains look different.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm thinking if their brains look different because of that experience, then wouldn't, like, ADHD brains look similar or no?
Well, look is not the right word.
Okay.
Let me just start there. Because if we think about what is the brain and how does it function, it's electrical. Hello. It's a great question because when you look at ADHD, I don't know which place to start, from the end, from the back, or the beginning. But let's just say we give them Ritalin, right, or Adderall. Why are we giving them that, and why does it become something that is kind of used internationally? Well, because we know that it's hitting something that's familiar or similar in the brain. So it's not a matter of looking. It would be a matter more of language I would prefer to use would be processes of the brain. So you could say that there are electrical chemical processes that may have some similarity, enough similarity to make the drugs work to some extent, to some degree, similar to every other child. Does that make sense to you?
That's perfect.
Now,
I got you.
Back, you know what I'm saying? Now, going back to what I was saying earlier, and again, I would have to look, if you really want me to give you like a passionate answer, give me a day to really focus on it. But let me take you back to the whole concept of the child who has acute, ongoing, sustained stress. Yes, you're right. The brain does look, now I'm going to use the word look, the brain does look different because what we can now see on our scans, on that beautiful machinery that we have out there, is we can now see that there are less electrical chemical synapsing going on.
Okay.
More atrophy. Okay, so yes. So sometimes it will look like it. Sometimes you'll see a different electrical chemical. And yes, sometimes you will see structural differences. So yes. So
Okay.
I don't know if that helps.
Nope,
Okay.
that's perfect. Perfect.
Okay.
Okay, so we're going to begin again, and I will mute everyone out because I have background noise now, so sorry about that.
No, that's okay.
Everybody's
Okay.
muted out. Here we go.
All right. So we're going to talk. Hello, everybody. I hope you had a nice little break there and got some water, got hydrated, because it's good for the brain.
Muted.
I have to remember to drink my water. I don't really like it, but I do drink it. All right. The peripheral nervous system. We have links from the central nervous system with our body's sense receptors, muscles, and glands. The peripheral nervous system gives feedback from what we're feeling. Like if your finger, your little child, God forbid, touches the hot stove and it burns, that's going to be sending an information from that finger all the way up the arm, all the way to the spinal cord, and all the way up into the brain, through the thalamus, into the brain, to the frontal lobes, and they're going to say, uh-oh, this hurts. Okay? Because that's how we work. We work in conjunction. We are a team. We have two components of the peripheral nervous system, a somatic nervous system. Don't try to learn all this. Just kind of get a gist of it. I don't know all this. I have to look it up every time I talk about it. And then the automatic nervous system. Okay? If you get just concepts, if you realize that garbage in, garbage out. If you realize if your finger touches something, it's going to make nerve connections. It's going to go to the brain, and the brain is going to process it. That's the way to really think about it and start to have ownership of it. So in this peripheral nervous system, we have a somatic nervous system, and we have an automatic nervous system. What's the somatic nervous system do? It transmits sensory input, touch, for example, taste, to the central nervous system from the outside world. It directs motor output, the voluntary movement of our skeletal muscles. Okay? When we want to move our large muscles, we're moving through our somatic nervous system. We have a connection. Our autonomic nervous system. Very, very important. And what's fascinating about our autonomic nervous system is, back in the day, before some of the guys in Harvard started to do some research with monks in some Himalayan mountains, we used to think we had no ability to mess or control with our autonomic nervous system. But lo and behold, as science is, we recognized through these monks, I forget what the name of their, what type they were, Herbert Benson out of Harvard went to these monks and decided to study their galvanic skin response and their blood pressure and all types of medical things. And they realized that these monks, through their meditation, could do things to the autonomic nervous system that they didn't think could be done. The monks could slow down their heart rate through their meditation. They could slow down the perception of temperature, hot or cold. It was amazing. And hence, after that, Herbert Benson from Harvard, he wrote a magnificent book, which is kind of like one of the biggies. It's called The Relaxation Response. And it's still used a lot in mental health and medical health now. So the autonomic system is amazing. It influences our glands and our muscles of our internal organs, our heartbeat, our digestion, our glandular activity. And it's a dual system. It's our fight and flight system. It has a sympathetic nervous system within the autonomic nervous system. If you got any of this, I'll be impressed. Tell me. Trust me. So we have in this dual system sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. And they do different things. Think about it. When you feel like you're in danger, that reptilian brain of yours, that beginning brain says, oh, I'm being attacked. Your body's going to do certain things. And then when you feel like you're out of that danger, your body's going to try to recoup itself. So that's why you have these two systems, and they do different things. The sympathetic nervous system will dilate your pupils. The parasympathetic system will contract your pupils. The sympathetic nervous system is going, oh boy, there's a big bear there. I better get my act together. It's going to get you to be aroused. It's going to accelerate your heartbeat. It's going to slow down your digestion. It's going to raise your blood sugar, stimulate the glucose, so you have more energy. It's going to work with your adrenal gland activity. That adrenaline is going to start pumping. The noradrenaline in the kidney is going to start going. It's going to relax the bladder, dilate. Do you ever hear the expression, oh, yeah, I was so scared I peed myself? Well, these are things because, the old wives and the old people with wisdom, they knew that when you had an emotional thing going on, it had a physical response. Just common sense. And then it cools you with respiration. And then when you're recuperating, it's going to contract your pupils, it's going to calm you, relax you, it's going to slow your heartbeat, it's going to stimulate your stomach and pancreas, et cetera, et cetera. So our system was made beautifully to interact, our whole bodies. We're not just a brain, and then we're not cut off from our neck down. That's why it's so important to watch everything we do with our own bodies and really train that to everybody that we know. So these parts of the brain are extremely important, and the peripheral nervous system is extremely important because they all are working together in tandem, like that orchestra I talked about. So, 3 interconnected anatomical parts. The 3 big boys, the cerebral cortex, which are the higher brain processes. I got a great story about that, and I know I can't go on for days, so I'm going to try to hold back. I'm going to tell you this one little story. If any of you have any pets, cats, dogs, you're going to know that they love you forever. They love you no matter what you do. You could hit them, you could kick them, whatever it takes. They are there for you. because they don't have that higher part of the brain that's processing, they didn't do so good with me today, but the animals are always going to come back. Man's best friend, yeah, because their brain processes don't go to the abstract level that ours do. However, they do feel love. They do feel parts of the affect that we feel from our brain, and they do make basic interpretations. And then we have our cerebellum, and I know it's funny to think about that, because when you think about your dog just for a minute, or your cat, I know in some countries, they don't perceive the animals as having real feelings, but we now know through research that they do. They don't go to abstract levels like we do, and they're not philosophical, but they do. So now let's talk about our cerebellum. It's an eighth the size of the cerebral cortex. It does balance, muscle tone, movement, coordinating body senses. It assists in automatic behavior. And what we've recently, not so recently anymore, but it was first thought that the cerebellum simply worked with basically motor and balance. But we do know now that it has some link to our emotions and our affect. If you want to remember the cerebellum, go think about the sports Olympics and think about that high diver who goes to that high diving board and looks out the water, and they orchestrate a dive where they dive into that water. It's so clean that it doesn't make a splash. That's the magnificence of your cerebellum. And then we have our brainstem. The brainstem is about the size of your index finger. It's kind of like, if you look at a broccoli, and you have the head of the broccoli and then the stalk, that's the stalk part is your brainstem. It's about the size of your index finger. It monitors survival mechanisms. The things that make us alive, that keep us alive, our heart rate, our digestion, and our breathing. Brainstem injuries, super exceed, that's not the word, but if you have a brainstem injury, then it can impact the ability to do many things in cognition. But then there's a reverse side to that story, but just know that the brainstem is what keeps us alive. It has to have its ability so that you have heart rate, so that you can have digestion, and that you can do your breathing. Okay, let's look at our cerebral cortex. It's divided. Each one of us, we have a left hemisphere and we have a right hemisphere. But unbeknownst to me, I did not realize until I went to do my doctoral dissertation that there actually was a study of a woman, and now there's more that we're finding, of a perfectly looking normal person who only had their left hemisphere. And how one of my mentors found this out was that he went to do testing, and then they went to do scans, and there was only a left hemisphere. The child was born that way, and yet was able to function. So you can see the synchrony of that orchestra. Yes, do you do better with two? Possibly, but you can survive with one. So we have a left hemisphere and a right hemisphere. Each is responsible for the opposite side of our body. So in the brain, if you have somebody who has a stroke and the left hemisphere is impacted and hit, they call it a brain hit, then the right side of the body, you're going to see the motor problem, okay? You're going to see language problems. You're going to see the manifestation of that left hemisphere stroke on the right side of the body. And if it's a right hemisphere stroke, you're going to see different types of symptoms depending upon where the stroke happened in the right hemisphere, but you're going to see left side damage of the body. So that's contralateral invertebrates versus ipsilateral for the invertebrates in terms of motor commands and responses. There are many ways the cerebral cortex communicates. Cortical brain cell to cortical brain cell, association areas with each other, and sensory and motor areas. Cortical to subcortical. So we're going to go from our gray matter in the brain to our axonal matter. The gray matter is like the brain cell, the body of the cell, the neuron, and then the white matter is what we talked about as axonal, and that's the part we really didn't have a good a good feel about in terms of imaging work until recently. And then you have interneuron communication. Understanding left versus right hemisphere similarities and differences helps us look into the strengths of the brain and offers us opportunities to better relate to children. Now, 10 years ago, I would probably say to you, well, the left hemisphere does this and the right hemisphere does that, and it would be like a Psychology Today magazine. And yeah, you know, you can, like, if you know you're just kind of being somewhat shallow about it, yeah, they do. The right hemisphere does this and the left hemisphere does that. But what I want you to walk away with now is to know the intricacy of the relationship and the resiliency of the brain to pick up different functions if there is difficulty. So I'm going to talk to you, you know, and tell you right hemisphere, left hemisphere. However, they really do work in tandem. And if you have ever heard the expression, oh, we only use 10% of our brain, that's a Psychology Today kind of quip thing. You know, that's not true. When you went back to the brainstem, you got to use all the brain so that you can breathe, that you can digest, the circulation, all the way up to your frontal lobe. So you know, take some of that stuff. They're cute. They're little cutesy things to remember. However, they're not totally accurate scientifically. All right, so ask yourself these questions. Do you know the processes within the brain involved with attention, thinking, problem solving, learning, and memory? What's really more important is to know about the processes versus where these processes are occurring. Because as we have more brain imagery technology occurring, we're seeing more amazing possibilities in terms of how the brain is linking together. And I'll share with you one small article about language in a little bit. Are these processes the same for everyone at every age? Kath, that gets back to your question. And no, the answer is no, they're not. Did you know that the hemispheres create different worlds? And in a way, they do. Let's take a look at the hemispheres first, okay? What's our right hemisphere do? It looks at temporal processing and spatial relationships, map reading, location finding, directions of any sort. Did you ever hear anybody who go, okay, you take a left and then you take a right and then you go two streets down and, you know, or you just show them a map and like they've got it? You know, and then you have another person, they've like, wait a minute, I need MapQuest. Wait a minute, I need my GPS. You got to hear the lady talking on your GPS, you know, and you have to look at the words. That's because the right hemisphere can easily pull together things that are spatial. They have an understanding. They can do geometry, no problem. Okay? They can analyze nonverbal language. What does that mean? Well, you know, we communicate in many, many ways, not just by words. This is why I find it fascinating today, because I can't see you. And half of my communication, being that I was a dance major when I was undergrad, was I'm looking at the movement of a person most of the time. So not seeing you is interesting. But the nonverbal language, an eyebrow raising, a sigh, color, your colors on your cheeks changing, you know, all kinds of different nonverbal language occurs. Communicating through an emotional way, understanding nuance. The right hemisphere really can pick up a joke. You know you have right hemisphere damage. If you say a joke that everybody else is going to laugh at, but the patient's not going to, you know, could that be right hemisphere damage? Possibility. Left hemisphere. It produces and helps you understand language. Okay? Helps you talk language motorically, okay? And it helps you have a receptive understanding of what language is. It's sequential, which is not one of my strong points, so I have to really write everything down. I'm kind of more of a Stolze person. I can see the entire forest, but to see every tree in it, it takes me time to decipher. The right hemisphere, the left hemisphere person will be able to see every tree in the forest. They're sequential. It's logical, it's analytic. Like Valerie can do these computers. There's a sequential, logical, analytic way that has to be done, step by step by step. I'm already nauseous and a nervous wreck. But Valerie can do it because her brain is wired that way. And the left hemisphere is detail-oriented. Okay? It really wants to know when you're going to do that computer programming, it's a colon and not a semicolon. It's detail-oriented. The right hemisphere pretty much will pick up the whole feel of it. They'll get a gestalt of it. However, the great thing is that these two hemispheres do communicate, and they communicate by many bridges. And one of the bridges, one of the largest bridges, is called the corpus callosum. It has a very big job to do. These fibers connect the two cerebral hemispheres. You have bridges at the front of the brain, the top of the brain, in the middle of the brain, and in the back of the brain. And you'll see bridges with the circle of Willis. You'll see bridges that all throughout. The posterior, anterior, commissure, all these different things. You're going to see different bridges. And when these bridges get hit by a stroke or by some other type of tragedy to the brain, then you're going to see different problems occurring with behavior, emotion, and thoughts. Okay. So another way to categorize brain anatomy is the forebrain, the midbrain, and the hindbrain, which is used in many neurology manuals. The forebrain is our cerebral cortex, its ultimate control and information processing center. It's really where we kick it and really do our goals and planning. Our midbrain is our limbic system where we feel. Oh, do we feel? It has our amygdala for fear and aggression, our hippocampus for our memory, our hypothalamus, which does like a million different things from temperature regulation to depression, and it regulates our serotonin, one of our neurotransmitters. And through eating. For those of us who might be putting on too much weight, let's look to our serotonin, let's look to our hypothalamus and other parts of the brain as well. But the hypothalamus seems to be a gatekeeper in many, many things. It governs the endocrine system, control over body hormones. It's linked to emotion, thirst, sex, body temperature, reward. The thalamus relays system of all senses, except for your olfactory. That goes straight through. It doesn't have a train station to stop at in terms of going to the frontal lobes. And then we have the hindbrain and the brainstem. And this, as I talked about before, controls your automatic survival functions, breathing. The reticular formation, RAS. This is what we talk about when we're talking about attention deficit disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, the reticular activating system, attention and arousal. The medulla for heartbeat and breathing. There's a crossover point of nerves to the opposite side of the body. And then we have our cerebellum, the little brain, doing many things. Remember that diver going off the board. It also does some things in terms of learning and memory and takes orders from the cerebral cortex to coordinate voluntary movement. Everything's always back. You know, imagine like a train station and a hub. You know, this information is flowing back and forth from the thinking chief executive part of our brain, the front of the brain, going all the way back and down to the brainstem, to the spinal cord, and now to the peripheral nervous system. So it's always it's this amazing train system. Okay, and then our spinal cord, our pathway for neural fibers traveling to and from the brain, and that controls our simple reflexes. When we're looking at our brain and doing brain studies and all these big machines, they slice the brain from front to back and top to bottom. And they talk about it in neurology textbooks and things in different ways. We look at different planes when we use magnetic resonance imaging. Mechanisms of the atoms spinning like a top, and they end up depicting excellent pictures of the brain's soft tissue. So the different technology really is getting at different parts of the brain. If you go in and God forbid somebody gets a hit to the brain and they just do a basic CAT scan and they didn't do it with dye, warning, 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 that's very elementary and old-fashioned. You know, it basically will just tell you, the big structures in the brain are looking pretty okay, and but it's not really telling you a lot. A CAT scan with dye is a little better, and moving into our MRIs is even better. So don't be satisfied with just the simplicity of the basic CAT scan. It does tell you if the brain has shifted, like if the left hemisphere has moved over to the right side, that could be problematic in terms of the commissures or the bridges. So, and it could be impacting brain structures on the other hemisphere. Yeah, that's the nice part. That's what that original CAT scan did. But there's much more sophisticated tests at this point. Okay, the cerebrum has 4 main lobes. It has the frontal lobes, And the frontal lobes do a lot of different things, from language to motor. So we have our motor cortex, and then we have Broca's area. That's for expressive speech, motor speech. That's the part that makes us be able to move and get the words out. So our frontal lobes do behavior. I think you can pretty much read this. Take a minute to just take a look. Now, with the frontal lobes, I hope you really did read it for a sec. The frontal lobes, if you can conceptualize them as your chief executive officer, they're the CEO. They're the boss. They, depending where in the frontal lobe, but let's just say keeping the frontal lobe as one for a moment, the frontal lobe is the one that makes your mission statement. Why am I here? What is the purpose of my life? What am I doing? It is the highest place where you form abstract thinking. I don't know if you know the difference between abstract thinking and concrete thinking, but you can, an abstract thought is like saying, what is love? What is peace? Those are abstract thoughts. Many, many people could have different definitions of those things. Concrete thinking is what we call folks who are more pragmatic, more tool makers. Doesn't mean they're less intelligent. There's no value statement here. But it means they think conceptually differently. Okay? You have a lot of bright people who are the pragmatics. And if they see a pen, for example, they're going to say the pen is for writing. That would be somebody who's concrete. That's what I use that pen for. Someone who's more abstract will say, oh, the pen is a form of communication. It's a form of telling about myself. Neither's right or neither's wrong, but that's what the frontal lobes do. They take you to that abstract level of thinking. They also do planning, problem solving, analyzing, sequencing, judgment, decision making. They also impact on your sexual urges. When we have patients with frontal lobe damage, we often see that they can no longer put the brakes on. Phineas Gage, if you know that popular case back in the day, he was a wonderful church-going man who had a wonderful job, wonderful life, never a problem. But we got impaled by a rod going on an angle through the frontal lobes of the brain, the front part of the brain by your forehead. And after that, he was no longer Phineas Gage. He was somebody else. His boss tried to rehire him, but Phineas Gage was a mess, a vile, vulgar mess. Everything was a curse word. Everything was sexual. He would say he's going to do something, and he could never follow through. So he had to be fired. His life just became one as a drifter. So the frontal lobes are extremely important. Let's look at the parietal lobes. The parietal lobes are also very necessary. That's the other part of the brain. The parietal lobes you know where your body is in space. It's about sensory cortex. Where am I? They call it kinesthetic intelligence, tactile sensation, touch, stereognosis. For example, if I put a dime or a nickel or a penny in your hand and your eyes were closed, stereognosis is you would be able to tell me what it is because the parietal lobe is saying to you, oh, I remember that feeling. It's got lumps on it. It must be so-and-so president. That's a such and such coin. Okay? Or that's a paper clip, I know that. Or that's a kid. It also does visual functions. Prosopagnosia is fascinating, not often seen. I can't say that I've seen cases with it, but it's certainly in the textbooks. That people cannot recognize faces. Can you imagine looking in the mirror and you don't recognize what you're looking at? You don't recognize yourself, and you don't recognize others. It wipes out an entire life of your memories of yourself and other people. And it's frightening. And then proprioception, the recognition of internal stimuli. Am I sitting down? Am I lying up? Am I balanced? Do I have neglect? Do I know my right side from my left side? Think about how that would impact language and reading functions. Sensory integration, combination, in combination with comprehension. And our temporal lobes, our auditory processing. How many times do you hear the kids got auditory processing problems? Very, very interesting. The learning specialist goes in, the psychologist goes in, all these people, auditory processing problems. Well, a lot of times you're going to get it here. Not only are you going to get auditory processing problems here, but you're also going to get what we now know more and more about, is you're going to get a lot of your visual hallucinations, auditory hallucinations. We now know there's great research that came out of, I think it was the University of Pennsylvania. Time magazine had major articles, lots of articles, scientific and not, were written about religiosity and those people who say they were speaking with God. But when they did, and this is no comment on religion, I adore God, I'm very religious. But in terms of the science of it, they saw that the temporal lobes would spike when they were doing positron emission tomography, when they were thinking certain thoughts about religion. And they actually felt that they were hearing the voice of God. Doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. I'm not negating that at all. I just, from a scientific point of view, want to tell you that we can actually see it now, the process of what the brain looks like it's doing when you're thinking about certain things. So the auditory cortex, Wernicke's aphasia, the angular gyrus, which is like another bridge, is very important in terms of language and language understanding. Speech, hearing, auditory memories, vision pathways, behaviors and emotions, temporal lobe, fear, the Kluver-Bucy problem, rage, fear, identity, music, many, many things with the temporal lobe. So you can see how we need all of this. And then our occipital lobes, which is our vision cortex. So let me just say this and see if this makes sense. Putting it together. Hearing a word, okay? You need your auditory cortex and Wernicke's area. Seeing a word, okay? Visual cortex and your angular gyrus, because it feeds it back over so that you have an understanding of what the word means. Repeating a word, you need that frontal area, motor cortex, and Broca's part in the brain, frontal. So you need all of these parts. It's that train station, back and forth, just to do simple things like hearing a word, seeing a word, and repeating a word. All right. I'm going to run through some of these, just going to talk to you a little bit about them. I'm not going to read all of this to you. This you can take home. But I'm just going to give you a flavor, and this is for you to address differently. After I go through this, I want to just basically talk to you a little bit about cognition and why it's so important and why you're seeing so much going on with it in the world of education. So we know that we have our gray matter, which I was telling you before, are the nerve cell bodies. And then we have the axons where the nerve, the electrical chemical message goes down those axons. It gets to the part where those chemicals are released into the synapse. That's going through our white matter, okay? And then we have the cerebrum. Our gray matter is the cerebrum is our gray matter, the four lobes of the brain, and the limbic system, our emotional system. But let's talk about some of the specifics. So I'll say, let's say for the right frontal lobes, primary motor cortex, okay, in terms of movement, executive functions, personality and behavior. In the right frontal lobe, as I was saying, I had a patient who would come down the halls and say, "Hi, doc. Boy, I just met with Lisa, the OT, and does she have great boobs? I tried to touch them, but she got really pissed off, and I don't know why. She's just got really great boobs. I mean, what's the big deal about touching Lisa's boobs? They're really great." That's my right frontal. He was a magnificent guy before. He had a terrible car accident in California. Why? Because he was drinking, and he had a Ferrari because he was like a very wealthy guy selling this expensive materials, and he went boom, and he crashed his brain in. Never to really get better, just to be managed. Okay, so let's look at the right temporal lobe, memory functions and emotion. Left temporal lobe, primary auditory cortex, auditory comprehension, visual comprehension, production of meaningful speech and language and verbal memory. Very, very important. And then our right parietal lobe, those are the things I talked about in terms of sensory integration, voice, tone of voice, inflection, prosody, all of these things. Primary sensory. Is it too hot? Is it too cold? Where am I? Where's my body position? Am I sitting up? If you ever go into a rehab and you'll see patients or the physical therapist saying, oh, they could only stand for 2 minutes because their balance was so lousy. They had this visual neglect syndrome and they keep pulling over and I can't get them to stand up straight. Visual neglect is a very serious problem, pulling from the right parietal lobe. And then we have our occipital lobes, primary visual cortex controls visual acuity. Now there's a difference. People will say, well, nothing's wrong with my eyes. I can see, but I don't know that it's a doggy on the piece of paper. Well, there's a difference between are your eyes okay and is the perception of the process and the ability to have a meaningful interpretation of what you're seeing matching with what your experience is. If you remember back at the beginning when I was saying you want to have that match happen for line orientation, color, etc. That's the part that gets messed up in terms of the vision. It's not the eyeball. Okay, and then the arcuate fasciculus is a large pathway that connects the left frontal Broca's area with the left temporal Wernicke's area. It's one of the bridges. I'll do a few more, and then I'm going to move on to some other pieces I want to get to with you. See, I have a spelling mistake here. The fissure sylvius, it separates the temporal and parietal lobes, articulating processing, language processing for semantics and syntax and word finding. Kathy, I want to go back to your question for a minute in terms of will it look the same, and is it the same parts of the brain getting A, B, C, or D behavior? Just looking at language for a minute, there are different parts of the brain that are going to be focusing on different parts of language. So these questions are really complex. Not to take away the magnificence of common sense, but to understand from our brilliance of common sense that all of these different pieces have like different caves that you can go into to go deeper and deeper and dig into more and more of what's happening with that particular process, language, auditory, visual, visual spatial, kinesthetic, emotional. They all have different caves. So that's why it's not easy to answer that question per se. But globally, we do have some global statements that we make. And then the cerebellum behind the brainstem, which is attached to the pons. Again, it's balance, it's the diving board, coordination of muscle and fluency. And the brainstem is reflexive for all of our reflexes, involuntary body functions, breathing, heart rate, coughing, sneezing, swallowing. All right, so we've been through a lot of the brain structures. There is something that I couldn't pull up because I'm not a techie. That's where I need Valerie. I'll send this to you too. It's the Brodmann map. And if any of you want to go deeper into where we have actually kind of mapped out where we have different function, process, location, I will get that over to you.
Dr. Robbins, excuse me,
Yes.
we do have a question
Yes.
about something that would pertain to the section you're just finishing. It says,
Okay.
my son had a concussion at 2 years old. Could this be the cause of his depression or his ADHD?
Well, the reason I'm pausing is, you know, concussion they're finding out can have long-term effects, as you see, much later in life. I don't know enough about concussion to say if it can cause ADHD. It might be a factor and a variable, but in terms of causation, that I don't know.
Thank you.
In terms of his depression, yeah, I mean, it could. There is a possibility it could. Depends upon where the hit was. I mean, he could. Is it a major depression or more like a dysthymia that he has, or a sadness?
I'll unmute her. Hold on one second.
Okay.
Michelle.
Hi. No, he
Hi.
has he has major depression. I was just curious because, you know, they kind of when he had his concussion at 2 and he got hit in the front, he like actually got knocked over and hit a like a gym floor.
Yes.
And you know, I was just curious if that like broke up some of the, like what you're saying with the brain, if that like broke up some of the you know, the functionings, and you know, and could be the cause of what he's going through at a later date.
Yeah. You know, I would like to get back to you more on that question, because I don't want to mislead you in any way. I can tell you that it could be a variable, and I can say, let me just think about this for a minute. The brain is really resilient. You know, and it does take hits. We now know with all the stuff in terms of sports medicine that concussions do have longer-term effects and more serious effects than we realize, and they're contributory. So if you get hit once and then, I mean additive, and then you get another hit, then they do build on each other.
Okay.
So if he's had possible other hits along with that, or other stressors, or other biomedical, psychomedical issues, that could all go together. But I don't know how to answer it to give you the cleanest answer, but I will delve into it for you.
Oh, okay. Like I said, I was just curious, and I really was just wondering if that's, you know, was a factor, because, you know, where he's going through so much now as his brain is starting to grow.
Yeah, I could see it as a factor, though I also want to say the brain was designed to also have great resiliency. So if that was his only hit, but it, again, like I said, in terms of putting block design together, depending upon where he was hit, the intensity of the hit, you know, these are all factors that play into it.
Okay, thank you.
All right, sorry to hear that about your son.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm muting out. Carry on.
Okay. Okay. I'm going to skip this a little bit here. All right, this is what I would like you to do now. If you have paper and pencil, so we've been through the brain. You know that we have 4 lobes. We have the frontal, we have the parietal, we have the occipital and the temporal. We know that they're very significant. We know that they communicate together. Now what I want to do, in terms of really where the integrity of taking care of our brain converges, is in this risk survey. I'd like you to honestly take out paper and pencil, and I would like you to answer these questions. Let me go through them with you first. You have to be honest about your age. You have to be honest about if you smoke and what you smoke and how much you smoke and how long you've been smoking. And drinking. And yes, I do have to say that patients say to me, well, I don't drink. And I say, well, what do you drink? He says, I just drink beer. I don't drink. Beer is a drink of alcohol. Well, I just do those light things. You know, it's not too much alcohol in them. Or if you tend to be taking a little cough medicine too often, if there's anything with alcohol in it, put it down. Fats in your diet, your cholesterol level. If you have any problems with your heart, particularly atrial fibrillation, which means your heart is not beating at a regular rhythm, it goes off and on. It's arrhythmic. If you have salt in your diet, if you're eating tremendous amount of fast food, because it's fast to get to, and it's inexpensive and it's easy in our very fast-paced life. If we're eating a lot of food out, not prepared at home. If you're eating a lot of foods that have many, many ingredients in them, and they don't sound like they're food, put that down. Exercise, honestly. Are you doing any exercise? How much, how often, duration, intensity. Medical diseases that you now have. List them, because they all impact in one way or another. Thyroid, diabetes, heart, all impact on the brain. Your sleep patterns. We used to think, oh, it's wonderful, he doesn't need a lot of sleep. He's great. I mean, he only needs 2, 3, 4 hours of sleep and he's doing great. Well, he might be doing great, but it's not great for the brain. Research is finding that more and more. Are you getting 2 hours of sleep, 4 hours of sleep, 6 hours of sleep, 8 hours of sleep. Stress level. What is it? 1 is that you're really having no stress or very little stress, and 10, it's very high. Be honest with yourself. List your stressors. And then, Valerie, if you'll tell me when people kind of call into you and tell you they're done, I'd like to talk with them a little bit about it.
I'm waiting for responses.
Okay.
Oh, okay, I have some responses. Let's see. I'm going to unmute someone who's done.
Okay, wonderful. If anybody would like to share what they've written, that would be great.
Okay, Michelle.
Okay.
All right.
What do you want me to share? Everything?
Sure.
Okay. Let's see. I'm 38. I don't smoke. I drink, but very infrequently. It's not probably maybe if I do, I'll have one once a month.
Okay.
I do have too much fat in my diet, and my cholesterol level is high.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any heart problems. I try to keep the salt in my diet down.
Okay, good.
I don't exercise, which right at this point. And medical diseases, as I have diabetes, I just found out. Depression, anxiety, and fibromyalgia. I sleep with medication. I have to take trazodone at night to keep myself sleeping. So I have, because I did struggle with that for a lot of years with sleeping. And I think my stress level is 7.
Okay. All right. I didn't put the actual form in because I don't want anybody to get really scared. But you know, this is a formal survey done by the American Stroke Association and Cardiology Association. And what we realize is that exercise, every single one of these things, every single one of them raises, people say, well, I just have a little bit too much salt, or I'm really not exercising. Well, I just have diabetes, or da-da-da. Or did you tell me how many hours you sleep?
I do sleep at least 8 hours. That I do.
But
I sleep, but it's because I'm medicated to do that.
Right, the trazodone. So what you want to realize is, did you ever smoke cigarettes?
No.
Good, brilliant. Okay, and drinking's not an issue. Too much fat in the diet. Are you slim, overweight? Where are you?
I'm overweight.
Okay. Were you an emotional eater?
Yeah, I'm an emotional eater. Yeah.
Okay, and that goes along with your stress level. Okay,
yeah.
So you would be probably, if we did the formal one, at believe it or not, because there's no exercise, because of the medical conditions, because of the need for the trazodone, and you said there's a little bit too much cholesterol, did you say?
Yeah, my cholesterol is a little high, yes.
Cholesterol's a little high. Then you might want to consider, because this is for long term, what we know happens with all of these things is that they have an impact day by day, hour by hour on our system, which eventually we see as problematic in the brain in terms of things like carotid artery difficulties, atherosclerosis, different things occur, strokes occur. And what the research is showing, and this, if I could go out in the community and have a microphone and just like have a car and drive around the streets and say, how much fat is in your diet? Are you going to McDonald's 3 times a week? Are you getting enough rest? Are you too overstressed? If I could be going around
Unmuted.
in every city saying, if you want to have good brain health, change these things now. You're 38, did you say,
Yes.
Michelle? Okay. At 38, you're wonderfully young. So at 38 years of age, you can, and that's why I talked about the beginning in terms of the brain and the empowering part and the self-esteem part, you can actually, and that's what research is showing, you can actually reverse a lot of problems that happen in your body, which includes your brain. So if you look at your cholesterol, if you look at your salt, if you look at your fats, having a drink of wine every now and then, research has not shown that it's a big issue. But exercise is a major issue. And why? Going back to common sense, why would you think exercise is important? I'm not going to put you on the hot seat to answer it. But to get oxygen to the brain, to move, moving brings oxygen to the brain. Again, back to common sense. Why would diabetes be a problem? Think about what happens if the insulin level isn't regulated. And we now know that sleep, although these people might be able to function well with very little sleep, we now know that at least 8 hours is important, not only for the brain, but because of what happens with cortisol and all the fat that starts to lie in the belly. So all of these, for all of us, not just you, and I'm so glad that you took the courage to come in and share your little profile, but for all, and stress level, who doesn't have stress today? Managing that stress, looking at the stress and saying, are they necessary? Is there any way I can give that to somebody else to do? Delegating that. Those are all things that are really going to keep you in great brain health so that you don't have to worry about Alzheimer's or Pick's disease or any of the dementia diseases to keep your brain healthy. So thank you so much for doing this. And if you could share this with your families and with your loved ones and with your colleagues and ask them, do you take serious any of the things on this list? And are you working on any of these things on this list to help yourself have a healthier brain? That would be a gift. That would be a gift. So,
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
All right. Okay.
Dr. Robbins, there's another question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Dr. Robinson, David Crosby from New Jersey speaking. How are you?
I'm good. How are you? It's nice to hear a male voice.
Tell how old you are.
I'm 20 now, Dr. Robinson.
Robin.
Robin.
Okay.
Yeah. My only question is, at what age does the frontal lobe of the brain stop reacting positively towards, the things such as
Stimulation.
weed? Yes, stimulation, exactly. Things such as, weed, whatever, cigarettes, whatever drugs that people do. When does the frontal lobe start to deteriorate?
I like your question.
Don't you love him? Don't you love him, Dr. Robbins?
Yes.
You have to.
Yeah, it's a great question.
And just so people know, this is my son. Okay?
Oh, is it David?
Yeah, this is your David.
David, hello, sweetheart.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. Well, they don't really deteriorate unless you have done really big damage to them. They're not going to deteriorate. Okay? However, if you're totally abusive with alcohol and you're totally abusive with, street drugs or over pharmaceutical drugs and mixtures of drugs and lousy food, the whole brain is going to be compromised. But in terms of your frontal lobes, David, there's lots of research in the last 10 years coming out that we recognize, this, and it became legal too in a lot of legal cases, David, in terms of, the frontal lobes, they really don't develop at the same rate as everything else. They develop later, and therefore the kid can't be responsible for what he does.
That's what I've heard.
Right? Well, they're starting to revisit that, David. Every decade we have a different thing. Eggs are good, eggs are not good,
Yep.
So I say we take all of this in with stride and recognize that a lot of what we do, we could blame it on our frontal lobes and the hormonal factory that's hacking us and making us wild during the teen years. because those hormones are really rushing and they do impact on decision making, i.e. the frontal lobes.
Yep.
Yes, that is definite. That is definite. And do we not do planning? Do we not future pace when those hormones are raging and our libido is growing? Yes, all of that occurs. And at the same time, there are stoppers that we do have, even as that raging hormonal process of chemicals is just seeking new, exciting activity every minute for the novelty of it. Yes, that is all part of it. And yeah, is it an excuse? Yeah, but it's also biological. Is it the reason we should all go around and, do whatever? No. So there has to be some inhibitors in there, and that's where culture comes in and outside resources come in to help. I read another article, David, which is very, very fascinating, that in different countries, I wish I could tell you which one it was, whether it was Australia or wherever, China, I don't remember. But basically, America is one of the main countries where when kids get to be adolescents, they dump adults. And they move on and they hang out with each other. So what does that do? Right? So in other countries, in other cultures, the kids aren't allowed to dump the adults like we have it here in the United States.
Yeah.
Okay? So this is an American kind of thing, that we allow the teenagers to reinforce the teenagers, and none of those teenagers have good frontal lobe development yet.
Right.
So great question, David.
Now, Dr. Robbins, I have a question.
Sure.
I typed it in, but I don't. For some reason, it's not working with me. But anyway, so when we think about children who are incarcerated in the adult prison, let's say between the ages of 12 and 17. There's a lot of, whenever I read anything about that, one of the major discussions is around, well, we really, it's ethically and morally wrong because at that point, these children's brains have not developed to the point where they're making adult decisions. And so that's the part of the argument about not incarcerating them in the adult system. When they talk about what age would you say a child, see, that doesn't even make sense because it's I'm thinking it's 18 or 21, but really when it comes to criminal behavior, would you say that an 18-year-old is able to make those decisions? And I guess what I'm saying is how can we put 14 and 15-year-old kids in adult prisons, with 40-year-old lifers?
Yeah, we shouldn't, Kat. We shouldn't. But this question, again, my mind, even though I try I'm not sequential, I see the forest and not the trees.
Right.
I drive myself nuts because I see all the trees too. So to answer your question fairly, if I'm lumping just the kids that like you and I know in New Jersey, and the lifestyles and what's going on in terms of their stressors and their supports and resources. I would say absolutely not, you don't do that. The brain research backs it up with a million documents that their brain they should not be around those people. First of all, they're too easily influenced. Just think about all the things that teens need. They want power, they want control, you know what I mean? If they think they can buddy up with some criminal who's, newspaper worthy, there's just so many reasons why they shouldn't be in there beyond the frontal lobes. It's just the wrong thing to do.
Could you advocate for the that at the age of 14 or 15 that their brains have not developed to the point where they can make those types of decisions? Like, do you see what I'm saying? Huh?
Yes, that's what the research says. It says it goes even to 20 to 25 years of age. The developmental process of the frontal lobes are not completed until about then. And some people never get them developed, Kath, because some people, because of all the other inside-outside cultural stuff, like the pictures I was showing earlier,
right?
Sometimes people don't ever really get frontal lobe development to its fullest esteem, just like Kohlberg's work, in terms of ethical and moral structure. Some people never get to the highest levels. So, it's an important question. Bottom line, basic, yes, the 14 and 15-year-olds should not be with the older people in jail. That all the research shows that. However, it doesn't mean if we wait longer for each individual person, young adult, that they're going to really have fully developed frontal lobes. They may or they may not. And also the other aspect of it is, there's another piece of it too to look at. There are some children who do very bad things at very early ages.
Yeah.
The bad seed and such and such. And that's really not just a frontal lobe issue. And that's a whole other seminar. But it's a complex question, and I would certainly advocate that they shouldn't be at the same place in adult prison. We know that,
when you just said that, it reminded me of your other slide. I keep going back to that where it said how life experiences shape. And because when you just mentioned that to me, automatically in my brain, the picture I had is of the 9-year-old child who has been adopted from Russia and lives here in the United States with a quote-unquote perfect family, and ends up killing the family dog, at an early age. You see what I'm saying? And so in my mind, I guess I'm thinking, look at all those, those things that point to that. But then I guess I'm wondering too, if that's true about the frontal lobe, then I'm sure somewhere there's been some research around criminal behavior and the lack of the development of the frontal lobe. Am I right?
Oh, yeah. Hold on. Let me just pull some stuff. Hold on. Okay. Let me see if it's in here.
And maybe other people have already thought of this, but this is just coming to me now as far as maybe, I guess there's...
Okay, can I just read this to you?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay. This is National Institute of Health transcript done July 21, 2008. Parts of the different. This is an abstract. The adolescent brain. I'll just read you a couple of things here, okay? Adolescence is a period between childhood and adulthood, encompassed by changes in physical, psychological, and social development. These alterations make this period a time of vulnerability and adjustment. According to the National Center for Health Statistics, there are over 13,000 adolescent deaths in the United States each year. Approximately 70% of these deaths result from motor vehicle crashes, unintentional injuries, homicide, and suicide. Results from the 2005 National Youth Risk Behavior Survey show that adolescents engage in behaviors that increase their likelihood of death or illness by driving a vehicle after drinking or without a seatbelt, carrying weapons, using illegal substances, and engaging in unprotected sex, resulting in unintended pregnancies and sexually transmitted diseases, including HIV infection.
Right.
These statistics underscore the importance of understanding risky choices and behavior in adolescence.
I got you.
So yeah, okay, yeah.
I got you.
So yeah, you're gonna have that.
And the more...
Did that help?
Huh?
Did that help? Is that?
Yeah, and you know what?
I mean, that's
actually, the more you talk, then the more my brain is formulating stuff. Because as you're talking about that, I'm thinking bipolar disorder, and that risk taking, and the relationship, between adolescents diagnosed with bipolar and this is, I'm just going to say this, but we don't have to answer this because this is a whole nother seminar. But how do we separate out the kids who show risk-taking behavior based on a bipolar diagnosis versus just risk-taking behavior from an adolescent? But I don't want to...
Can I answer just briefly?
Sure.
Okay, let me just answer just briefly because I can. I'll tell you what I don't know. I'll tell you what I do know. In the DSM-5, they're taking away bipolar for children because it's not politically correct, because they don't want to say the kids are bipolar. But what is happening is they're calling it something mood dysregulation. It's really basically bipolar disease. And I think we should be advocating to really, it's a beautiful concept you're talking about, that we do start to separate that out. And yes, you're right, it isn't a whole other seminar to do in terms of what is happening with the whole concept of the diagnoses and how they're going to play out in the next 5-10 years in terms of legally, politically. So, but bipolar certainly, I mean, just look at our retarded kids, you know, who are going out and doing criminal, they're going around and taking packages. I don't know what the heck they're doing. You know, I mean, there's so many places that we're not really protecting the kids.
I remember a while back when you used to tell us about the large number of children and adolescents that were being diagnosed with bipolar, that it was just becoming a dumping ground, you know. When you know, practitioners couldn't figure out what it was, all the kids would end up in bipolar disorder, just for lack.
Right.
I remember you sharing that with us years ago.
Yeah, and they really didn't know what to do with them. Some of them would now really be considered bipolar, and some would have different diagnoses. But we do now know that bipolar can occur in kids, whereas before people were just totally adverse to that whole concept, including me. But the research, the science is bearing it out differently now.
I got you. Okay.
Okay. Any other questions?
I don't have any here.
Okay, good.
Listed.
Anybody want to mention anything else about their survey?
Do you want me to go? Do you want me to tell you mine?
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
So I'm almost 52. I don't smoke, although I did smoke 1 year from, say, 16 to 17.
Okay.
I don't really drink, maybe an occasional vodka tonic or maybe an occasional glass of wine. Fats in my diet, probably more than I should have. My cholesterol level is fine. I don't really have too much salt in my diet because I don't like salt. My exercise is not what it should be. It's like non-existent right now because I'm recovering from a broken foot, so I still have swelling and that kind of stuff. I have no medical diseases. I don't take any medication, nothing. My sleep patterns, a minimum of 8 hours a night. I can sleep 12 hours a day. I love to sleep. And my stress level, I would say on almost Monday through Friday when my kids are in school is 10. And other than that, on the weekends, it's nothing. It's very low.
Okay.
That's it.
Well, all right. Well, I'm glad to hear about so many wonderful things that you're doing in terms of how you're caring for your body. For you, Val, do not minimize the intense significance of exercise.
I know.
It is really, it is really much more important for all of our organs, including our brain, that we are exercising. And even with your broken foot, being that I'm a rehab person, you can still exercise in a chair. You can still do isometrics. You could still do a little Pilates in a seat, tugging in that belly.
Yep.
You can still raise your arms. So I'm not going to let you get away with it.
No, I know my problems. My problem is that little pouch that I have in the front. The kids, I gave birth, they moved out, the fat moved in. I'll be honest, it's there. Overweight.
Yeah, and
I'm really overweight, although I'm a very tall person. So I could stand to lose 10 or 15 pounds, honestly.
All right. Good. Well, that's good for you to know. And share it with your family. Share this with your family. I'm glad you have no medical diseases, and I'm glad that you sleep. The one thing I would say is for all of us, the Monday through Friday stress level, that's not good. It's a lot of stress. I know you were probably somewhat kidding, maybe, I don't know.
No, I'll be
but,
honest. It's high because I deal with, a son who's in special education and they don't do what they're supposed to do, and it's caused a lot of problems. But that's also coming to an end because he's graduating at the end of June, so that should drop off to
Oh, congratulations.
a 3 anyway.
Well, that's wonderful. That is wonderful. So you've had, at least 15 years of trying to get on the planet and get them on yours?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
we are worlds apart.
yeah.
But it's coming to an end. It's a good thing, and he's the successor out of all of it. So that's the important thing.
Right. I hope you're going to write his story.
Oh, many people have
It
asked.
would be wonderful to write his story.
But who's going to hold my hand and while I have to relive it to write it? Any volunteers?
I would be there for you
Okay, good.
because I think this. All right. Well, thank you so much, Val. I appreciate
You're
it.
welcome.
All right. Okay. I'll move on to the next slide, and then we're going to be done in a little bit.
Great.
Okay. So, neurobiological differences and other interesting facts. I couldn't talk about everything, so I'm just going to hit upon them just very briefly. You have to know that there are gender-specific things. I'm not going to go into them with what boys and girls are different in terms of cognition and learning, and also affect.
Muted.
There are differences. For instance, language fluency, females, 11% more brain cells than boys. Movement, many issues in terms of why boys move and why girls don't necessarily have to do as much movement when they're in elementary school. And all the cultural and value system and biases placed on movement, and is he a hyperactive child, and all of these things. Sitting still is not a biochemical part of little boys that are like little puppies. Enriched culturally appropriate environments are significant in terms of variables. That's very important to have it enriched, but what we also know is you need downtime. You have to be able to have time so that the brain can relax. What occurs during downtime is also important. What is the difference between, and we talked about that, Mr. Rogers and Sesame Street, and that's a very significant study. What do we know about sex in the brain? Well, David, as you were asking me earlier in terms of what's going on with that adolescent brain, it's not your fault that all you're thinking about is sex because you're very normal. That's what happens during adolescence. We need to be able to embrace these brain concepts, start to acknowledge them, stop judging and stop devaluing what is biochemical, and stop blaming so much. We really need to, as the brain is an orchestra in and of itself with the rest of your body, we also have to be able to engage the brain in our daily language. So how do we become that confident person who can go back to the first question I asked you in terms of, do you think you're smart, just average intelligence, or not so bright? And how do you start to use that level of confidence? Obviously, we love our children, whether they're ours or we're working with them. You have an incredible ability to think. All of us do. You have an ability to ask questions and never stop asking questions and keep asking questions. You have a legal right to ask questions. You have a legal right to ask for further documentation and proof of things that are going on with the people you advocate for. You also have a legal right to get a second opinion. You have a right to say, I do not understand, and it does not mean it has anything to do with your brain power. You have a right to say, teach me why you see it that way. You have a legal right to bring a representative to advocate for your child or those you advocate for. And you have a legal right to say, no, that intervention is not okay for my child. And I think that for all of us, if we recognize that our voice is equally significant, if not more, because we're the ones that spend most of the time with these children, if you're parents or caregivers, your knowledge, and again, research can back this up, your knowledge of the rhythm of that child is equally, if not more significant than what the professionals are saying. You want to consider the source always, garbage in, garbage out. You want to think about your expectancy theory in terms of whether you think these people, these professionals can cure anything. They can't. It is teamwork that must happen as a team, and you technically are the leader of the team, the one who's advocating for that child. So this is pretty much how I feel about things. I think it's totally exciting. Every day there are more things to learn. Don't lock one thing in and think that's where it's going to stay, because tomorrow another machine can be designed internationally and we can find out something new that's just going to throw the other thing out. So stay fluid, stay flexible, use your own resiliencies, teach resiliency to your children, and eat healthy and be wise. And I thank you so much for letting me do this morning and time with you.
Dr. Robbins, thank you.
Unmuted.
So informative. I've unmuted everything. If someone would like to say thank you to Dr. Robbins, now's your opportunity.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much. I got so much out of this.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad. That's great. That makes it really worthwhile for me.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, once again.
Oh, go ahead, Kat.
I said, once again, you were amazing. And even though we would so much rather have you here in New Jersey, this has got to be the second best thing.
Yeah.
And part of that is too because, and I think when we do this next time, we'll have video cams.
Okay.
Where or webcams is the correct term, where the participants can see you, because I think, and you can see them, because I think that, well, you won't be able to see them, but they can see you. And I think that's a big part of this as well too,
Right.
Their ability to see your facial expressions and things like that, and your excitement level. And so, but I think this was phenomenal. And it's just like, in the trainings where I do case studies.
Yes.
Nobody takes the time to teach parents this information.
Yeah.
They don't. I think so much of this is available only to professionals and providers. And I think that's part of the reason why they want to go to the training. But
right.
Nobody really takes the time to, they'll say to you, yes, your child has this particular diagnosis. And this is the type of psychotropic drug that they should be prescribed. But never does anyone really take the time to say, and this is what their brain looks like. This is
right.
how they're functioning. This is how it relates to their environment. You know what I mean? Nobody really takes the time to do. No, I don't think so. I don't believe that. And when I think about what we've done here today, for us, it's been amazing because, as you know, some of us don't even text. But, it always behooves me as to why, no other organizations are thinking about this. It's
well, that's because we love each other.
Yeah, but also too, I think you have a great love for parents. See, I think that's part of it too. You know what I mean? Like I said to you before, I remember all my psych professors, and some of them, well, probably most of them were brilliant. They were really brilliant. Like they had the biggest brains. But not all of them could teach and impart knowledge, And I think that's so critical. You know what I mean? And I think in and of itself, it's a very political thing to train parents. I think it's extremely political. I absolutely do. I absolutely think it's extremely political.
And we have to be political. You've got to. I'm so thrilled with what you're doing. We must be political We might not have the same political views, however, you must be political.
Oh, yes.
Very important.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's why, you know, the comments about like the case studies, and it was interesting because you should have seen the class, and I have to tell you, they were right on. And, you know, sitting back and really, like I say to them, this is, you know, this is what you have to do. You have to be a principal investigator. When it, you know, like they talk about principal investigators and all these big NIH grants and SAMHSA grants and you know, the things that professionals use when, you know, and psychiatrists use when a child comes into them. And really, we as parents have to do that too, because our answers may not be the same. And when our answers aren't the same, we need to share that with the professionals so they have a big picture instead of a very small picture. So I applaud you for that. Thank you for being on our advisory board. We will never let you go. I don't care how far you move. Okay?
Yes. Well, thank you for having me, Kathy, and I thank your audience.
Sure.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very
Enjoy.
much.
And if there's any questions or whatever, don't hesitate. If you think of things after, just let Kathy know, and I'll certainly try to answer them for you.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Okay, you too. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, I've stopped recording.